Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at the 9th round of the Global Chess League being held here in London. Now, the team that I am playing for, the American Gambits, were out of contention to finish in the top 2, but nonetheless, I'm having a pretty decent event overall. I've won 2 games, I've lost 1, I've had quite a few draws, so I'm trying to put up a good score to finish in style. All right, so in this 9th round, I'm playing with a black piece against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, also commonly known as MVL. Game starts with e4. Here I play c5, the classic Siciliano opening once again. Now you're probably wondering, why am I playing like this? Why am I playing a little bit more on the edge? Now the reason is actually quite straightforward. Due to the scoring format where you get 4 points for a win with black and 3 for a win with white, I want to take more chances because if I can get a win or anyone on my team can win with the black pieces, my opposing team would, the opposing team would have to win 2 white games to offset that 1 black win. All right, so I play the Siciliano, we get knight to f3, and here I play the move g6. This, of course, is a system I've played throughout the event so far. Maxime goes d4, takes, bishop g7, and now he plays the move c4. Now this, of course, is the classic Maroczy bind setup that Magnus Carlsen played against me the other day in our very exciting drawn game. So I play knight c6, bishop e3, queen b6, and now MVL plays the move knight b3. Now in this position, Magnus actually played the move knight to b5 here, and we had a very, very sharp game, but MVL plays knight b3 instead. Here I go queen back to d8, and now we get the move queen d2. Now MVL could have played knight d4 like the current world chess champion Ding Liren did in a very disappointing final round game for the Olympiad against Fabiano, but MVL has principles, and he has the white pieces. So we get the move queen d2. I go d6 here, we get the move knight c3, knight f6, and now we have the move f3. Now you're probably wondering, what was the purpose of queen b6? Now this is very advanced modern day computer chess where basically the argument is that this knight, let's just say put it on d4 here. If the knight is on d4, it's better placed, it targets knight, maybe some other squares it can jump towards, whereas on the b3 square, it's doing quite a bit less. Now this, of course, is not something that I as a human can explain or really understand, but the computer basically thinks the knight on b3 is worse than it is on the d4 square. So even though I've wasted tempo, it doesn't matter because the square placement matters the most. Go figure. So I play bishop e6. MVL plays knight d5. Here I play knight d7 here, trying to open up the scope for the b. Additionally, as you'll see, after bishop e2 here, I can now play the move a5 as the b6 square is covered. If I go a5 right away, after bishop b6, it's spaghetti-o time. The knight guards the b, which targets the queen. I move the queen, and then knight c7 forks the king and the rook, and I probably will lose the game very soon. So, knight d7 is played, we got bishop e2, and now I play the move a5. Now this, of course, is very harmonious in terms of the understanding of the position, because now I can start pushing p on the edge to harass the knight on b3, and white actually already has to be a little bit careful. Now, Maxime plays move rook b1 here. He could have played the move a4, but the reason he didn't is after b6, let's just say white castles, and I get the move knight c5. Suddenly, I'm gripping these dark squares very nicely. I have b4 and d4, and positionally, white can't really do anything on the queen side. So, MVL goes rook b1, I play a4, knight a1, and now I play the move queen to a5, offering the trade of the queens immediately. Now, one of the general rules around positions like the Maroczy bind, where you have a little bit less space, or you'll notice the pawns and the knight take more of the board, is that you want to try to trade off pieces. You're always looking to trade off the heavy pieces if possible. So when I go queen a5 here, I'm already feeling very, very groovy about the position here. Queens are coming off. Should be a pretty easy position to play, and I'm liking my chances. Now, Maxime plays move knight c2 here. He could have actually tried to force a draw by trading the queens and playing bishop d2. So if I go to a6 or to a8 on both of these squares, knight c7 will fork the king and the rook. So after rook a7, white can go bishop e3, and probably here I should play rook a5, simply making a draw. So MVL goes knight c2 instead. Now I play the move rook to c8. I'm happy to trade the queens on a5 because now there's no fork with knight c7, but additionally, I'm pressuring this pawn on c4. So, MVL goes b4, I play n peasant, he takes back, and now I decide to trade the queens. Now, one of the important things about this game is already I felt like I was doing quite well. We're in an endgame, a lot of time on the clock, so I started looking at my teammates' games to get some idea of how hard I need to press, because I already thought here it's a position where I can trade off a lot of pieces and make a draw. So I trade the queens, and now I go for the move f5. And here MVL decides to take the pawn. Now what I'm trying to do here is get this position where I have the two Bs on these diagonals here. I also want to loosen the grip in the center because you'll notice here that the bishop on e6 stops me from kicking the horse by pushing the pawn. Now if MVL were to play with like h3 just to illustrate the point, after takes and castles, black is a little bit better here because D's knights have some really juicy squares here. Say you get rook g1 and knight c5, now the pawn on e4, pawn on b3 are weak, and if white ever trades, now the d4 square is a huge issue as well. Now, this is pretty advanced from a positional standpoint, so don't worry if you're not completely following this, but generally speaking, these positions can get very dicey for white. So after f5, MVL trades, and now he goes bishop d3, we trade, and here I play the move e6, kicking the horse out of town. Now, after e6 is already getting a little bit scary here, and I was really surprised that MVL played the move knight c3. He wanted to play knight c3, and then he hesitated before playing it anyway, but I already think that at this point in the position, it's time to think back to a year like 2008 and 2009, and it's time to look for the classic bailout. Now, what do I mean by a bailout? What I mean by a bailout here is you stop having delusions of winning the game, but you start trading off the pieces and you go for the draw. Of course, typical bailout. So instead, MVL plays knight c3, and now I play the move knight to c5 using D's knights here. And now the king is a little bit weak in the center. This diagonal is open, and white actually has to be quite careful. Now, MVL probably should have played the move king d2, unlike in the game, but after knight to a5, look at D's knights going after all the pawns on the queen side, and after bishop c5 and a move like rook takes c5, black should be better here with a massive pressure on the pawns here. Also, I have d5 and b5 thrust. Knight is weak on c3, and white is still probably not doing terribly, but it is dangerous. Instead, MVL trades, I take back, and now white has to be very careful, because after knight to e4, I play the move king to e7, playing the classic Bond Cloud setup. We're in an endgame, so the Bond Cloud is much more effective here, and now I want to bring my rooks to d8 as well as the a8 squares, and claim both of the open files. MVL plays the move rook d1. He could not take the juicer here because after knight e5, I check the king, knight under attack. You move away, you lose the horse, you lose the game. And if you go forward to d4, there are many ways to win, but probably simplest is to go rook check. King's got to go, and once the king goes, you lose the horse anyway, and you lose the game. So MVL goes rook d1, and here I play a very good move, which is the move rook to a8. Now, I was really happy with my time usage and general moves that I played. I did not calculate this move all the way to the end, but my intuition told me that in this position, because the bishop covers a1, white cannot contest the file, and if I get the kebab with rook to a2, pressuring these pawns and the knight on the second rank, combined with a weak white king, I should be fine. So I didn't calculate this all the way to the end, but after MVL grabs the pawn and I go rook to a2, I assume that with the weak king in the center, the rook coming over, pressure on the king side, this has to be very dangerous. So MVL plays knight e3 here. Worth pointing out, if white plays a move like knight takes b7 here, I can simply play rook b8, attacking the horse. He goes back, and now I check him on d8, king goes away, and he loses the horse on c2 and the game as well. So MVL plays knight to e3 here, and now I play the move bishop to d4. Now, I don't know if this is the absolute best move, but it made a lot of sense because the knight guards the bishop. I'm harassing the knight on c5, and now this knight has to figure out where it's going to go. If white were to take on b7 here, I can play rook to b8, and it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time once again, as the horse is simply trapped. All the squares are covered here. Knight has nowhere to go where it won't be simply captured by a major piece on the board. So if MVL were to play a move like knight e4, for example, now after rook to d8, I have a lot of threats like knight to b4 and knight e5, both checkmate, say f4, knight b4, for example, or b4, knight e5. So the king is very, very loose here, and I'd also say that in a blitz/rapid game with no increment, it's very, very dicey here because you cannot spend 5 or 6 minutes looking for a perfect solution, because if you do that, you are simply going to get flagged. So MVL plays b4 here, guarding the knight, and now I play rook d8. Here there are all kinds of big threats. I'm threatening to simply take the horse and check the king. If you move the knight away to like b7, for example, there's rook to a3, winning the horse on e3, and white's position is extremely precarious. Now, computer, of course, in typical fashion, says that white can play the move knight to b3, which hangs the pawn on b4, because after king e4 takes, let's just say takes, rook takes g2. Apparently, after rook to b1, followed by knight c5 or knight d4, white is kind of in the game. Frankly, without spending a lot of time, you'll never find this, and if you spend a lot of time, you will, of course, lose on the clock. So it's a very, very bad situation. MVL decides to play the move king e4 after a 20-second think, and this move simply loses the game on the spot. Now, after we get king to e4, I play the move rook to e2, pinning the knight here on e3, and white has all kinds of issues. White cannot sack the rook, because after rook takes rook, this is simply an Arabian checkmate in the middle of the board. Secondly, I think what MVL missed in this position is I think he thought he could play the move rook to e1, because if I take, white is simply up a pawn on the queen side and winning the game. However, after rook to e1 here, I can ignore the rook, I can sack the rook with bishop takes knight, and now after rook takes rook, I have rook d4 checkmating the king once again. No squares are available here, and it's GG, why not? So, MVL is in all kinds of trouble here. If you were to play the move rook to d3, now I take this knight. If white takes, the same checkmate exists. And after rook takes rook, I take the knight, checking the king. King goes back, I check, and now I simply take. And after takes, rook a3, I have an extra horse on the board in the endgame, and I win. So, MVL could also try rook b3, but this also loses because I take the knight, and now if white were to take, I swap the towers, I win the tower on d1, and if white were to play rook takes rook, again I play the in-between move, bishop capturing knight to check the king, and after king d3, rook e3, king d2, I simply take the rook, and after takes, I have an extra knight, and it's game over. So MVL decides to go for knight takes pawn, sacking the horse, but after takes, check, king g3, and rook e2. I simply have an extra bishop on the board. I'm up 4 minutes on the clock, and I am well on my way to a big victory. So MVL plays knight a5 here. I go check, king h3, I trade the horses, and now I go rook f5, trying to lift the rook to checkmate the king on the edge. If white were to play a6, I check, king g4, rook g2, and it's checkmate as the wooden shield covers the critical f4 square here, and the king gets laddered on the edge. So MVL plays the move rook b7 check. I go forward, he takes to stop rook h5, but now I can sack the rook with rook takes pawn. He takes, and after rook h2, king g4, rook h7. The dust has settled here. I have a bishop for a pawn. White's pawns are all split wide, so as long as I show some good technique, I will win this pretty routinely. So MVL goes f4. I go bishop c3, a6, rook a7, and now he plays rook d6. And here I play the move rook c7, which is a very important move because what I understand here is that my bishop, as long as it gets this long diagonal, will always be able to stop the two pawns. I could have played bishop b4, but after rook c6, with ideas like c5, it's still winning, but it's getting a little bit tricky. So I go rook c7. MVL plays rook d3, and now a very important move is bishop b4. If I take the pawn, after a7, white is threatening to push p and get a queen, and I can stop the pawn, but in the process, I lose the bishop on c3, and with that, it becomes a drawn rook and pawn endgame. So I go bishop b4. MVL plays rook b3, and now I go bishop c5, and as I was mentioning before, this bishop stops both the pawns. Even if I put the bishop on d4 here, you'll notice that white can never push the pawns forward as the bishop will always capture, so because the pawns are split, this is a very routine win. MVL goes rook b5, I play bishop a7, stopping the pawn. We get rook b4, rook c6, rook a4, and now I play the move rook d6. MVL goes king f3, I check, he goes here, and now I play the move bishop f2, trying to set up a very devious threat. If white were to push p with a7, I can check, and after king h4, I have rook to a3, creating the classic fossil. I check the king, and I discover the rook on a4, and after king g4 takes, now the rook covers the queening square, and I win in a few moves. So MVL plays rook a2, a very, very, very good move here, and I end up going back to a7. Now, the reason is if I check on g3 after king h4, bishop e1, and rook a1, I no longer have the fossil with rook a3, because then I will lose the bishop on e1, and if I'm not careful here, white can try to push the pawn forward with a7 and a8. Now, computer will say I can check and go bishop f2, because I cover a7, I hit the rook on a1, and it's a classic big right triangle here, but frankly, there's no need to allow this, so I simply play the move bishop a7 instead. MVL goes rook a4, and now I play the move rook c3, and here Maxime resigns because if he moves the rook away to keep guarding the pawn, I go rook a3, and I win the pawn on a6. If he moves the rook back, then I take this one, and I will win very soon. And if he moves the king to h4, now I can go check, rook g3, and rook a3 once again to win the game. So, very, very smooth game for me. Very, very clean game, I would say. Not a lot of drama in this game for sure. But I did play a very sound game, moved pretty quickly, followed my intuition, didn't get too low on time. So I'm very, very proud of this game. I would say that it is easily the best game that I've played so far in the tournament. And I'm now on a very nice score with 3 wins, 1 loss, and a couple of draws. I'm gaining something like 12 rapid points. And considering how poorly I've played in rapid over the last couple of years, it's really nice to get some wins and improve my rating. So I win my game, the team goes on to win as well, so we're kind of out of the running for the top 2, but we still could maybe finish in 3rd or 4th, depending on the other team's results, in which case we'd potentially make quite a bit of money. All right, so I win my game, and now we're going to move on to another game being played in the match between the SG Alpine Pipers and the Upgrad Moomba Masters. Now, this match features the 2 5-time world champions in the event, Magnus Carlsen from Norway and Vishy Anand, the icon from India. Now, Vishy's having a very tough event so far. He's had 3 draws and 5 losses. Keep in mind that Vishy is 20 plus years older than basically every other player, so the age is probably catching up with him, but it's always great to see this classic matchup between the 2 5-time world champions. All right, so Magnus has the white pieces, and he opens with the move c4. We get c5, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6, and now the move d4. Vishy trades and goes e6, and here we get the move e4. Now, similar to my game with MVL, Magnus is trying to build the classic Maroczy bind structure in the center here, but black can play bishop b4, attacking the horse and the pawn all at the same time. Magnus trades the horses and goes bishop to d3, developing the bishop and intending to castle, but also guarding the pawns on e4 and c4 at the same time. We get the move e5, castles, and now the move h3 played by Magnus. Here, Vishy decides to take the knight on c3, and this is a very, very committal decision, and not a decision that I actually like all that much. I know this move is completely fine, but in a rapid and blitz format, I would have preferred to see something like queen to e7, or maybe d6 as well. So we get bishop takes knight, takes d6, and now Magnus goes for a very nice positional idea with this move c5. Now you're probably thinking, what is Magnus doing? He's sacking a pawn. But keep in mind here that Magnus has the 2 Bs, and in the long run, these pawns can become very, very easy targets on all of the diagonals for the dark square light B. Or the white dark squared bishop, I should say. So after c5, Vishy takes. If he were to go d5, for example, after takes, and now bishop g5, white is a little bit better with the 2 Bs on these diagonals here. You also have rook e1 to hit the pawn on e5, and it's a little bit hard to play. So we get d6, c5 takes here, and now we have the move f4. Now what Magnus is aiming for is he's basically trying to say, you know what, I don't care about these pawns, I just want open diagonals for the Bs. If I get open diagonals, I'll be able to prolong the game for a long time and eventually maneuver and win. So Vishy plays the move c4, we get bishop c2. If white were to take on c4, after takes, black can take on e4, and he's completely fine. So we get bishop c2, Vishy decides to trade, takes on f4, and now we get the move bishop e6. Now you're probably thinking, well, black's up a pawn, black's doing great. In reality, black is actually under a lot of pressure here because the bishop on f4 covers the b file, the pawns on c6 and c4 are weak, but most importantly, the knight on f6 has no great squares here. Bishop guards the pawn, and if you move the knight, you lose the horse. So knight is glued, and when you combine that with the 2 Bs and the open b file for the white rooks, Magnus is in the driver's seat. So we get rook b1, h6, a4, a5 played by Vishy, rook b7, and now we get the move knight h5. Now the big issue for Vishy here is if he were to play rook d8, white can simply trade off all the towers here and follow it up with bishop c7 and capture the juicer on a5 and probably win the game. So we get knight h5. Magnus goes bishop e3. We get g5. Idea behind g5 is to play for knight f4 to create some counterplay in the center of the board. Now you'll also notice here that the Bs cover a lot of critical squares. If black goes rook d8 after takes, let's just say king f2, there are no entries on the d file here. The 2 Bs cover all the critical squares, and white will try to go after the a5 pawn or the c6 pawn in short order and probably win the game. So we get g5 here. King f2, knight f4 played by Vishy, takes, king f3, and now we get to move rook f d8. Now there are going to be some errors in here, but they're kind of hard to spot. Computer says here that after rook b8, takes, rook b1, rook d8, black should be drawing here. And the reason this would have been better is because after rook f d8, white apparently has the move rook to a7, and white's a touch better, but frankly, very difficult to find. So instead we get to move rook b1, we get takes, and now we have the move rook b8, Magnus takes, and here we get the move rook b2. Now material is evened out, and black has an active rook here on the second rank, but that being said, material's even, but black has these weak pawns on c6 and c4, and additionally, Vishy is down 2 minutes on the clock, which portends very well for the future, or very poorly for the future, because Magnus can be the one who starts to drag the game out. So we get rook c1. king f8, king e5, king e7, king d4, and here Vishy plays move king d6. Now the computer says it's a very slight error, but frankly you're in a very tough spot here. You're down 2 minutes on the clock and you have to start moving quicker. Now the computer wants rook a2, and the reason it likes this move more is that if white tries to infiltrate with king c5 here, black can play the move rook to a3, and now after bishop d1 and rook to a2, apparently g4, rook to h2, and black's better. But without a lot of time to think, you have to start trusting your intuition, and these moves are not intuitive. So Vishy goes king d6 as expected, trying to block the king out from infiltrating. We get e5, king e7, and now the move g4. Vishy plays the move bishop d5, and this move is probably the best move technically, but it's a move that I don't like here because after bishop d5, now white can start pushing the p on the king side here with the move h4, whereas after rook to a2, white can't push the pawn because you lose g4, can't go g5, so both these pawns are kind of glued here because of the light square b, and it remains to be seen how white will make progress. After bishop d5 and h4, now white is pushing p on the king side. It's pretty much unstoppable. And on top of that, when you look at this position, you'll notice the rook on c1 very passive here. It's tied down to the bishop. But if you can open up the h file, you potentially can activate on the h file, maybe on the g file, maybe on the b file. The more open files that start to open up, or that's a bit of an oxymoron, the more difficult it becomes to defend the position. So we get king f8 from Vishy, Magnus goes king c5, and here we get the move king g7. Now this is a step in the wrong direction. Vishy still probably should have played king to e7, but after h5 here, white is now threatening to sack a pawn and push this h pawn up the board, and it's getting very hard to defend, especially with no time on the clock. So Vishy goes king g7. We get the move king to d6, and now we have the move rook a2, and here Magnus goes g5. We get the trade of the pawns here, and now Vishy plays rook a3. Now this is a move that loses the game on the spot, but already here it's very hard to play. You're supposed to wait with rook b2, but frankly after g6 takes an e6, white is now pushing p with this e pawn running up the board, and with no time on the clock, you're not going to defend this against Magnus Carlsen. So Vishy plays rook a3. Now keep in mind, a couple of moves ago this would have been the right concept, but because white has been able to open up the king side, this move is actually losing the game here because we get the move bishop f5. Vishy plays rook takes pawn. He could have played rook a2 here, but after g6, black's in trouble, as we'll see a very similar idea in the game. We get rook takes a4, Magnus goes g6 here, sacking a pawn temporarily, and we get the move pawn takes pawn. Now the computer actually says after rook to a2, takes, white still has to show some precision here, because if you were to play e6, king f6, and e7, now after rook to d2, there's a big threat that if you queen, I can fossilize you with bishop to f7 here, and it's already close to being a draw. So some precision would have been required here. Computer actually says, I think, that this and rook f1 is the winning line. Probably Magnus finds this, but you never know as he has to find one more move. Instead, in this position after g6, Vishy takes, we get rook to g1, and now white is activating the rook here when you combine it with the passed e pawn, and the fact that white still has this extra pawn on c3 here, which can't be captured immediately, black is completely lost. Vishy goes rook a3, we get takes, king f7, check king g7, and now Magnus Carlsen finds the best move with king to e7. Now it's a very nasty move here. There are other ways to win, like check and rook g3, but Magnus has a little bit more time here, and he calculates it out with king e7. We get rook b3 here, and now we have rook g6. If Vishy were to take after rook g6, king to h8, white can go king f8, bishop covers the h3 square, and now rook to h6 is simply an unstoppable checkmate unless you sacrifice a bunch of material. So we get rook b3, rook g6, king h8, and now Magnus plays move e6. If he were to go king f8 here, there's rook to b8, checking the king away, and now at least after a4 you can hope for a Hail Mary by pushing p up the board. Instead, Magnus goes e6 here. Now we get a4, we have king to f6 being played, and we get the move a3. Vishy, low on time, desperation mode, just pushing the pawn, hoping he get a queen and survive, but it's way too little, way too late. Magnus goes rook h6, we get king g8, bishop h7, king h8 is played. If you were to go to f8 here, many ways for white to win. Simplest is to go check and bishop g6, followed by pushing the p, getting the queen, and ending the game. So Magnus goes king h8, or not Magnus, sorry, Vishy goes king h8, Magnus plays bishop g6 check, king g8, bishop f7, and here Vishy Anand resigns the game as mate is unstoppable after king f8 and rook to h8. So, very, very tough game for Vishy. Kind of got into a position where the game dragged on, the players get low on time, and he simply ends up losing despite trying to defend his best. So what does that mean? That means that Vishy now has 3 draws and 6 losses in this event. He's getting outplayed, it seems like, every game, or he's losing on the clock in every game. I really am disappointed. Disappointment is wrong. I'm a little bit sad to see Vishy with this result, because I do always worry that if Vishy has too many results like this, he might actually officially retire from chess at some point in the near future, because he's not really being very competitive in this event. So it does worry me a little bit that Vishy might end up retiring officially at some point in the near future if these results keep up. For Magnus Carlsen, just another very, very good game. Understands the time control, gets into an end game. He massages the position, keeps improving slowly but surely, and then when the time gets really low, he just outskills Vishy on the board and on the clock. So big win for Magnus. His team is still in the hunt to potentially finish in the top 2. It's going to be a very close finish. Probably a lot will depend on the results tomorrow, including my match where I play against Anish. If we are able to defeat the PB, Peanut Butter and Geary team, they might not make the top 2, but there is still one more round, so there's a lot of drama in terms of seeing which teams will finish in the top 2, but that's going to be it for today, and we will await the excitement tomorrow. So on that note, I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the 9th round of the Global Chess League being held here in London. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and I'll be back tomorrow after the 10th and final round when I play against Anish Geary. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see all you guys over at the friend's house tomorrow for the final day of competition. See you guys. Bye.